I'm divorcing you, and I've already sold our beach house to start over with my trainer, she laughed through the phone. I kept my voice steady, replying, I understand. My name is George Whitaker. At 52, I'd spent 23 years as a commercial property negotiator based out of Jacksonville, Florida. I specialized in finding overlooked value in contracts others had rushed to sign. My career thrived on patience, precision, and an eye for details that others missed. Unfortunately, I hadn't applied the same scrutiny to my marriage until it was almost too late. The call came on a Thursday morning. I was in Brussels finalizing a warehouse acquisition for an American shipping company. 4 days into my trip, 6,000 miles from home, and Vanessa decided this was the perfect time to end our 15-year marriage. Kyle and I need a fresh start, she continued, her voice laced with a confidence I recognized from countless divorce stories I'd heard from colleagues. The beach house sold for a nice price. I've already signed the papers. Kyle Bennett, her personal trainer for the past 18 months, a 35-year-old who drove a car he couldn't afford and asked me once, without any shame, how much my watch cost. I didn't slam the hotel desk, didn't raise my voice, just calmly asked, when did you close the sale? Yesterday, she said, sounding almost disappointed by my composure. Buyer's moving in next week. I figured you wouldn't mind staying at the Marriott when you get back since you're always on the road anyway. After we hung up, I sat at the hotel desk for nearly an hour, staring at the Brussels skyline. Then I pulled out my laptop, opened my email, and wrote to 2 people. Monica Harrison, my title agent for the past decade, and Brian Eldridge, my attorney since before I'd even met Vanessa. The subject line read, Urgent, Fraudulent Property Sale Attempt. Outside my window, rain began to fall on the Belgian streets. I watched business people hurry for cover, opening umbrellas, rushing into cafes. 15 years together, and Vanessa didn't know me at all. She thought I was predictable, passive, that I'd roll over and accept whatever she decided. But there was one critical detail she'd overlooked. You don't spend decades in property negotiation without learning how to protect your assets. And you don't leave your livelihood to chance, especially when your instincts have been quietly warning you for months that something wasn't right at home. I met Vanessa Sanders 16 years ago at a real estate conference in Orlando. She was working for a luxury property management company, all sharp suits and sharper ambition. I was impressed by her confidence, her quick mind. Within a year, we were married at the courthouse with just her sister and my brother as witnesses. We bought the beach house in Amelia Island 3 years later. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a wraparound deck with unobstructed ocean views. It cost $1.2 million, almost my entire savings plus a sizable mortgage. I'd spend weekends repairing the weathered siding, upgrading the kitchen, and replacing the rotted deckboards while Vanessa decorated and hosted friends. This is our forever place, she'd said, raising her wine glass on our first night there. I'd believed her. For a decade, we made it work. She quit property management to start her own interior design business, which gave her the flexibility to join me on international trips when the opportunity arose. I'd extended my business days to include weekend getaways in Paris, Barcelona, Tokyo. We'd been good together, or so I thought. The first crack appeared about 2 years ago. Small things. She stopped asking about my work, started declining invitations to join me abroad. Her texts grew shorter, more perfunctory. Have a good meeting. Safe travels. No more, I miss you, or can't wait until you're home. Then came the gym membership. 5 days a week she'd train with Kyle, a former college athlete turned personal trainer. At first I was supportive, encouraged her newfound focus on fitness, but then came the unexplained expenses on our credit card. Dinners I wasn't part of. Weekend spa retreats with friends I'd never met. I didn't confront her. Didn't place tracking apps on her phone or hire investigators like some of my divorced colleagues had done. I simply observed, made mental notes, and quietly began preparing for what increasingly felt inevitable. 11 months ago, I transferred the beach house into a living trust. The paperwork was buried among refinancing documents for our investment property in Tampa. Vanessa had signed everything without reading, too busy texting on her phone while my attorney waited patiently. This protects us both, I'd told her. It wasn't entirely a lie. The structure would indeed protect the property, just not in the way she assumed. I never mentioned it again. just watched as she grew more distant, more attached to her phone, more dismissive of our shared future. After emailing my attorney from Brussels, I closed my laptop and pulled the property deed from my briefcase. I always traveled with it, a habit from early in my career when a client tried to back out of a deal, claiming paperwork discrepancies. The deed clearly showed the Amelia Island property was held in the George Whitaker Living Trust, with me as the sole trustee. Vanessa had absolutely no legal right to sell it. The irony wasn't lost on me. In our early years, she'd teased me about my paperwork obsession and tendency to read every contract word for word. "Life's too short for fine print, George," she'd say with a laugh. But fine print had been the foundation of my career, and now, apparently, the salvation of my home. I called Brian while walking through Grand Place, Brussels' historic Central Square. "She can't sell what she doesn't own," he confirmed after I explained the situation. "Any sale she initiated is fraudulent. The buyers have no legal claim." "And Vanessa? Attempting to sell property she doesn't own? That's fraud. Criminal charges are possible, though I assume that's not your preferred outcome." It wasn't. Despite everything, I didn't want Vanessa in legal jeopardy. But I also couldn't let her take the house. "I've contacted the county recorder's office," Brian continued. "They've flagged any attempted transfers on the property. I'll also notify any local title companies. This sale won't go through, George." After we hung up, I didn't immediately return to my hotel. Instead, I found a small cafe and ordered a coffee. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, watching tourists and locals pass by, trying to understand how 15 years of marriage had dissolved into this moment. What struck me wasn't anger. It was clarity. The betrayal wasn't just about another man or selling our home without my knowledge. It was the casual cruelty of it, the laughter in her voice when she delivered the news. As if my pain was an amusing afterthought, as if our life together had meant nothing. I sent a brief text to the Brussels client explaining a family emergency required me to return home immediately. Then I booked the first available flight to Florida. On the 9-hour flight, I didn't watch movies or read reports. I just sat quietly, a strange calm settling over me. For years, I'd navigated complex property negotiations for others, always finding the pressure points that would give my clients leverage. Now I would use those same skills for myself. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, balance, setting things right. By the time the plane touched down in Jacksonville, my course was set. I wouldn't yell or plead or try to salvage what was clearly broken beyond repair. I would simply enforce the contract she'd signed but never bothered to read. In property matters, signatures always matter more than intentions. That was a lesson Vanessa was about to learn. I didn't tell Vanessa I was coming home early. I rented a car at the airport and drove the 40 minutes to Amelia Island in silence. It was just after noon on Saturday when I pulled into our driveway. A black Mercedes convertible I didn't recognize was parked in my usual spot. Kyle, I presumed. The front door was unlocked. I could hear laughter from the kitchen, Vanessa and a male voice discussing what sounded like renovation plans. "The wall between the living room and dining room should come down first," the man was saying. "Open concept is everything in beach properties." I set my suitcase down quietly and walked toward the voices. Vanessa was leaning against the kitchen island, wearing a sundress I'd never seen, a glass of champagne in her hand. Kyle stood behind her, his arm casually draped around her waist, pointing at something on a tablet. They both looked up as I entered. Vanessa's smile faltered for just a moment before recovering. "George," she said, surprise poorly concealed, "I didn't expect you back until Monday." "Clearly," I replied, glancing at Kyle, who at least had the decency to remove his arm from my wife's waist. "This is awkward," Kyle said with a nervous laugh. "I should probably go." "Actually," I countered, "I'd prefer if you stayed. This concerns you too, apparently." Vanessa's expression hardened. "We don't need to make this difficult, George. I've been unhappy for a long time. We both deserve a fresh start." I nodded calmly. "I agree completely, which is why I've already spoken to my attorney about the fraudulent property sale you attempted." The color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" I placed my briefcase on the counter and retrieved the trust documents and property deed. "The beach house isn't yours to sell, Vanessa. It hasn't been for almost a year." Kyle looked confused. "You said the sale was final," he said to Vanessa. "It was," she insisted. but I could see the uncertainty creeping into her expression. Check the deed, I suggested. The property is owned by the George Whitaker Living Trust. You signed the transfer papers last May. Remember those refinancing documents you didn't bother to read? She snatched the papers from my hand, scanning them frantically. This isn't possible, she whispered. Not only is it possible, it's legally binding, I continued. The sale you initiated is null and void. The buyer has already been notified. Kyle's confidence visibly deflated. I'll wait in the car, he muttered, making a quick exit. Once we were alone, Vanessa's shock transformed into rage. You tricked me, she accused. No, I corrected her. I protected my assets, which is standard practice in my profession. You chose not to read what you were signing. That's not trickery. It's negligence. She tried a different approach, her voice softening. George, be reasonable. We can split the proceeds. There's no need for lawyers. Except there are already lawyers involved, I replied. Not just mine. The buyers are understandably upset about purchasing a property from someone who doesn't own it. They're considering their own legal options. You wouldn't, she whispered. I'm not doing anything, I clarified. I'm simply enforcing the legal ownership of the property. What happens next depends entirely on how you choose to proceed. Vanessa's face hardened again. She grabbed her phone from the counter. I'm calling my sister's lawyer. You won't get away with this. I didn't argue, just nodded and said, You should definitely consult an attorney. I'll be staying at the Hilton downtown tonight to give you space, but to be clear, this house is not being sold, and I'll be moving back in on Monday. As I turned to leave, she called after me. This isn't over, George. I glanced back at her, standing in the kitchen we'd renovated together, champagne still in hand. Actually, Vanessa, I think it is. Sunday morning, I met with Brian at his office. The space was quiet, empty of the usual paralegals and assistants who filled it during weekdays. Brian looked tired but determined as he spread several documents across his desk. There's more, he said without preamble. I had my investigator do some digging after your call. He pushed a folder toward me. Inside were bank statements, credit card receipts, and property records I'd never seen before. Vanessa's been busy, Brian continued. She opened a separate account last year, transferred about $170,000 from your joint savings. The amount hit me like a physical blow. That was the majority of our liquid emergency fund. There's also this, he added, sliding another document forward. Preliminary paperwork for a retail space in Savannah. Lease is in both her name and Kyle Bennett's. They're opening a fitness boutique, signed 3 months ago. I stared at the pages, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't an impulsive affair. This was calculated, planned. They'd been working toward this for months, maybe longer. The timing makes sense now, I said, more to myself than Brian. She wasn't just selling the house for a divorce settlement. She needed capital for this business. Brian nodded. And there's one more thing. The buyer for your beach house? It's a shell company. Guess who owns it? Kyle. His brother, Jason Bennett. They were trying to get the house at below market value through a fraudulent sale, then likely flip it for profit after you discovered the sale and were forced to negotiate. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just Vanessa leaving me for another man. This was a deliberate financial scheme to extract maximum value before discarding our marriage. I felt something shift inside me. The calm acceptance I'd maintained since her phone call transformed into something colder, more focused. This wasn't just about protecting what was mine anymore. This was about accountability. What are my options? I asked. Brian leaned back in his chair. Legally, you're in a strong position. The trust protects the house. We can freeze the joint accounts to prevent further transfers. As for the money she's already taken. He paused. That's trickier. Florida's an equitable distribution state. She could argue it was her share of marital assets. And the fraudulent sale attempt? That's where we have leverage. It's criminal fraud, potentially grand theft depending on how a prosecutor views it, but I'm guessing you don't want to see your wife in jail. He was right. Despite everything, I didn't want that, but I also wouldn't be played for a fool. Here's what I propose, Brian continued, pulling out another document. A divorce settlement that's fair but firm. She returns 60% of the transferred funds, waives any claim to the beach house. You waive any claim to her new business venture. Clean break, no criminal charges. I studied the draft agreement, weighing my options. And if she refuses? Brian's expression was grim. Then we pursue all available legal remedies, including potential criminal charges for the fraudulent property sale. But let's try the civilized approach first. As I left Brian's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. My lawyer says you're bluffing. The house is joint property regardless of your trust trick. See you in court. I showed the message to Brian, who shook his head. She's getting bad advice. The trust documentation is solid. Send the settlement offer, I decided, but prepare for court. I don't think she'll take the reasonable path. I spent the rest of Sunday in my hotel room, reviewing financial records and property documents. With each page, each discovery of Vanessa's deception, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about standing my ground against someone who thought they could simply take what I'd spent decades building. Monday morning, I checked out of the hotel and drove to the county courthouse. Brian had filed the divorce petition first thing, along with an emergency motion to prevent any property transfers pending resolution of our case. By 10 a.m., it was official. Vanessa couldn't legally sell the house even if it hadn't already been protected by the trust. Next, I visited First Coast Bank and spoke with the branch manager, Thomas Parker, an old client from my early days in property negotiation. Within an hour, I'd separated my accounts from Vanessa's and secured my remaining assets. Anything else I can help with, George? Thomas asked as we finished the paperwork. Just one thing, I replied. Can you tell me when the next automatic payment to Elite Fitness is scheduled? He checked the system. There's a recurring payment of $300 set for tomorrow. It's been charging monthly for about a year and a half. I nodded. Please cancel that. And any other automatic payments except utilities for the beach house. By noon, I'd updated my credit cards, notified my company's HR department about changes to my benefits, and spoken with our insurance agent. Methodically, I was untangling 15 years of financial entanglement. My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the morning. Vanessa, then her sister, then a number I didn't recognize that I assumed was her lawyer. I let them all go to voicemail. Around 2 p.m., I drove to the beach house. Vanessa's car was gone, but the Mercedes still sat in the driveway. I used my key to enter, half expecting the locks to be changed, but they weren't. Kyle was in the living room, hurriedly packing a duffel bag. He froze when he saw me. I was just grabbing my things, he said quickly. I didn't respond, just stood in the doorway watching him. Look, man, he continued, growing visibly uncomfortable. This wasn't personal. Vanessa said the marriage was over long before I came along. Where is she? I asked. At her sister's. She's pretty upset. Said you were trying to ruin her. I almost laughed at the irony. Is that what she told you? That I'm the villain in this story? He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. She said you were controlling, that you trapped her in this town while you traveled the world. And the business you two were planning to open with money from selling my house? Was that my fault too? His eyes widened slightly, a confirmation that Brian's information was correct. That's what I thought, I said. You can tell Vanessa that her settlement offer is at Brian Eldridge's office. She has 48 hours to accept before we proceed to a contested divorce and potential fraud charges. Fraud? The fear in his voice was unmistakable. What are you talking about? Attempting to sell property she doesn't own, opening businesses with misappropriated funds. Take your pick. Kyle grabbed his bag and moved toward the door. I stepped aside to let him pass. One more thing, I called after him. The buyer, Jason Bennett, your brother, right? Tell him if he wants to avoid being named as a co-conspirator in the fraud investigation, he should formally withdraw his offer on this property by close of business today. The look on Kyle's face confirmed everything. Within an hour, my phone rang. Brian with news that Jason Bennett had contacted the real estate agent to rescind his offer on the beach house. By evening, I'd changed the locks, deactivated the old security system, and installed a new one with cameras. I ordered delivery from the seafood restaurant Vanessa and I had frequented in happier times and ate on the deck overlooking the ocean. The waves rolled in steadily, unchanging despite the chaos of human lives. Tomorrow would bring more legal maneuvers, more angry calls, more untangling of the life we'd built. But tonight, sitting in the house that remained mine, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not joy, the end of a marriage could never bring that, but the solid certainty that comes from standing your ground when someone tries to take what's yours. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Vanessa in Brian's conference room. Her attorney, a young man with an expensive suit and nervous eyes, shuffled papers while attempting to project confidence. Vanessa hadn't spoken directly to me since that day in the kitchen. She'd communicated only through increasingly desperate legal threats that Brian had systematically dismantled. Today was meant to be a pretrial hearing, but we all knew it wouldn't get that far. The evidence was too overwhelming. "Before we begin," Brian said calmly, "I'd like to submit these into evidence." He slid 3 documents across the table: the trust deed, bank records showing Vanessa's systematic withdrawal of funds, and a signed affidavit from Jason Bennett admitting to the fraudulent property purchase scheme. Vanessa's lawyer quickly scanned the affidavit, his expression falling. He leaned over to whisper something in her ear. Her face remained rigid, but I could see the defeat in her eyes. "We're prepared to settle," her lawyer announced after their hushed conversation. Brian nodded. "Our terms are simple. Vanessa returns $100,000 of the misappropriated funds. She relinquishes all claims to the beach house and other properties held in the trust. George waives any right to her new business venture and agrees not to pursue criminal charges." "And if I refuse?" Vanessa asked, the first words she'd spoken all morning. "Then we present this evidence to the district attorney," Brian replied matter-of-factly. "Fraud over $100,000 carries serious penalties in Florida." Her lawyer placed a restraining hand on her arm. "We need to discuss this privately." They left the room for 17 minutes. When they returned, Vanessa wouldn't meet my eyes. "We accept the terms," her lawyer stated. I didn't speak, didn't gloat, just signed where Brian indicated and watched as Vanessa did the same, her signature as familiar to me as my own after 15 years of shared tax returns, Christmas cards, and anniversary notes. It was over. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of the beach house, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic. The property looked different now. I'd renovated the kitchen, replaced the weather-beaten siding with something more durable, and installed hurricane windows throughout. The changes weren't just practical, they were symbolic, wiping away the old to make room for something new. I'd heard through mutual friends that Vanessa and Kyle had opened their fitness studio in Savannah, though on a smaller scale than originally planned. The business was struggling, apparently. I felt no satisfaction in that news, no joy in her difficulties, just a vague sadness for what might have been if different choices had been made. The divorce had finalized 3 months ago. Clean. Final. The settlement terms executed without further drama. Vanessa had returned the agreed-upon funds, which I'd promptly invested in a commercial property in downtown Jacksonville, a small office building with steady tenants and reliable income. My phone rang. Monica Harrison, my title agent. "Just checking in," she said when I answered. "How's the beach house?" "Getting better every day," I replied, watching a pair of pelicans glide over the waves. "Thanks again for your help with the trust setup." "That's what friends are for," she said. "Actually, I'm calling because I found another investment property that might interest you. Similar structure to what we did with the beach house, but commercial. Good protection, steady income." "Send me the details," I said. "I'm interested." After we hung up, I continued watching the ocean. The waves rolled in, steady and predictable in their rhythm. There was comfort in that consistency, that natural order that couldn't be manipulated or stolen away. I finished my coffee and headed inside to get ready for work. The house was just a house, wood and glass and concrete. But it was mine, and sometimes that's enough.